there's a clip of me on my Facebook page that's is literally is me just exploding in emotion for about 30 seconds after winning a race, and that is the best feeling.
What is up, everyone? Welcome back to Total Sport, and today we have a very special guest on another multi-sport interview, our first motorsport guest. So it's a big moment for us. Hopefully we can get quite a few more. We're joined by Mr. Toby Davis. How are you, Toby?
Hello all. Yeah, I'm not doing too bad actually. Thank you very much, mate. I'm surviving.
Yeah, that's the way forward, and he's got the motorsport headset on as well. That's what we're loving to see.
Gaming chair.
Bet he's been playing a lot of F1 during lockdown. Huh?
That's it. Yeah. I've been doing a few bits of sim racing and stuff, trying to keep myself sharp. So yeah.
Absolutely, mate. So first off, for those who don't know who you are, just give us a brief sort of background of your career so far in the world of motorsport.
Well, I mean, I started in karting as most of us did. Me and my dad had a bit of a play in a championship called Junior TKM about 2005. I think I started doing that. We moved into superkarts, which are 250cc gearbox karts. Did that so on the long circuits around the UK, Silverstone, Brands Hatch, this sort of thing. And then in 2016, I won a scholarship with Team Hard to do the Volkswagen Racing Cup. Which is pretty cool. That was a full paid-for season, and I did two more full seasons after that, 2017, 2018. Took a year out last year. Basically, a couple of sponsors sort of went by the wayside with Brexit, unfortunately, and then obviously now we're in a pandemic, so it's a bit difficult at the moment to do any racing whatsoever. But we're putting plans together for making a comeback. So that's the idea. We're not quite there just yet, but that's the current plan. So yeah, it's been great so far. I've been racing since I was 13, and to be able to race at all is a wonderful opportunity. So
yeah, I mean, talk to me about the sort of development program in motorsport. So how does it sort of all come about? Because it's quite different to other sports in that respect.
So yeah, I know. It would be quite nice if I was good at tiddlywinks or something that didn't quite cost so much. The thing with motorsport is it is something you have to pay for. Professional athletes only really exist in Formula One, in motorsport. Everyone else below that, if you want to be professional, you basically have to earn more sponsorship deals than you need to pay for the racing. So that's kind of how it works. In terms of development, you start with karting, something nice and cheap, low level, and if you're any good, you pick up sponsors along the way, and that's probably 80% of motorsport is spending time talking to sponsors, looking after them, showing them what you can give them, social media posts, this kind of stuff, and it has changed. 15 years ago when I started, social media wasn't a thing really, so you gave sponsors TV coverage or interaction that way, but yeah, it's changed now, and it's all about social media interaction and so on. But development wise, it starts young in karting as teenagers and younger still for some kids. Lewis Hamilton started when he was like 6, and you just work your way up through the categories until you get into kart racing, really.
Yeah. So what in particular sort of inspired you to get into it?
I always enjoyed watching F1 as a child. My earliest memories are Murray Walker talking about Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill and this sort of thing in the early 90s. You probably you're a little bit younger than me. It's a little bit before your time. But that's what I remember as a child. And we had various computer games and stuff, and the little wheel and that sort of thing. I think the main thing was I was all right at it. When we did like karting on holiday and stuff like that, it turned out I was all right. And then when we first started doing the racing, it's sort of, again, I was doing okay. So it's just sort of something we focused on because I was good at it. I played all sorts of sports: football, cricket, table tennis, but this is the one I was good at. So this is what me and my dad focused on, really.
Yeah. So you said about sponsorships and how big they are in that respect. So how difficult was it for you to first sort of get that sponsorship in that respect?
So to get sponsors, you have to actually be racing. It's one of those kind of paradoxes. So I'm very grateful and lucky to be able to have a family who can help afford to go. Initially, it was to go karting, and we would run on sort of 5, 6, 7,000 pounds a year, which is I'm very grateful that we had that as income that we could spend on it. But the categories I do now are 40, 50, 60,000 pounds a year, and that's not something that most families can afford themselves. So it's basically finding that hole in the budget to fill that gap, really. So sponsors are critical, and of course, as soon as you have a crash or something with loads of damage, then the bill goes up a bit, and it goes up a bit, and so you have to have a bit of headroom in it as well. So the sponsors are critical, for me anyway. Some families can just afford to pay, but that's not the case with me, and that's why I was very lucky to have won a scholarship with Tony Gillam and Team Hard, because that was my sort of stepping stone into cars, really. With the supercars, we were spending £5,000 or £6,000 a year. There was no chance that we could go car racing. So to get that scholarship really gave me a foot in the door, and then I could say, well, this is what I'm doing. Help me next year. Help me achieve this again. So that's really where it stemmed from.
Yeah. So how difficult was it? You mentioned the Volkswagen Cup.
Yeah.
So when you first went into that, how difficult was it to sort of adjust to the new level?
It was a bit tricky, mostly because I had no car experience at all. Everything I'd done had been karts before that, and it is a different driving style, actually. So the karts is you're very aggressive. You get your elbows out. It's your weight is part of the how that thing handles. So you're very on top of it. You're very part of it. A car, you have to be very smooth. You have to be you're driving with your fingertips, really. So you're sort of driving like this, turning in very, very gradually, and the thing transfers its weight very gradually. So it's totally different, and it is something I adapted to actually reasonably well. I won my second ever race, so that was probably the pinnacle of VW Cup, actually. So it was something I had to work on, because for years I've been much more aggressive, and it was something I had to change in my style to look after the tires and this sort of thing. So, but thankfully I had a bit of testing beforehand, so I could sort of practice those skills. So that's where it came from.
Do you think it's sort of a common thing for all motor racing drivers to have to adjust from vehicle to vehicle?
Absolutely, and the adjustments are not just from vehicle to vehicle; they're also in the conditions. So if it starts raining, you have to totally change how you drive. If you're on worn tires, you have to change how you drive. Sometimes it's setup related as well. So you might go to a totally different type of track, and you have to deal with fast corners suddenly, and you have to get a bit more brave. So yes, it totally changes, and what makes a good driver separate them from the best is their ability to be very good in all conditions and with all sorts of cars. And if you look historically, the best drivers are those sorts of people. Ayrton Senna was very good in a multitude of cars. Jim Clark would win races in British touring cars as much as he would in Formula One. He did rallying. That these guys were just exceptional talents, and were able to do it in any machinery.
Yeah. So moving on, like for yourself, what conditions are ideal for the way that Toby Davis drives?
I like things to be set a certain way. I like the setup to be how I want it. It's a very narrow parameter that I'm not a Jim Clark. I need the exact setup of the car. If that's how it is, so if it's set up how I like it, and the car's moving about nicely, and the weather conditions haven't changed, and there's nothing else to worry about, I'm quite good. If it starts raining halfway through a race, then I'll be nowhere. I'm just not that. I haven't quite got that talent that some people seem to have. I need to practice and do lots and lots of laps to get a good competitive lap time. That happens on sim racing as well. When I do my bits of sim racing here and there, some people can do 30 laps on a track and be straight on the pace, and I have to do 300. It's just how it is. But then I can be competitive then. So it's just I take a longer time to reach the ceiling of my potential, if you like.
So, talk to me about sort of the importance of this simulated racing. So, when it's the technology's developed so much over the years, are you seeing that it's more of an accurate reflection now than it ever has been?
Absolutely. And it's probably the closest in terms of other sports. So like there's no football simulator really that's that close. That you can really say that's a good simulation. Whereas racing is extremely close. In fact, I would go as far to say in the next 5 years to 10 years, you'll have such high levels of realism. The only thing that will be missing is the actual forces. Everything else will be accurately simulated, and you'll be able to drive at home the exact same car with the exact same setup, weather conditions, all the rest of it, track layout, that you could see on television. So we're not that far away from that. We're very, very close. And I think I have a feeling that some of the F1 teams have simulators in their bases that are really quite a lot better than what we have at home, and are able to simulate accurately these conditions. So in terms of other sports, there's nothing close. So it is, for someone like myself, very valuable in getting practice in for my racing. Particularly with some of the simulators have like laser scan tracks, so that to within like every inch is modeled. So you have the same bump in the same place, the same track width, and if you plug the same car in, you might as well be driving on the actual track. The only thing you're missing is the speed and the G-force. So I think it's a critical tool.
Yeah, and do you think it's something that more and more people will begin to utilize now, especially in this situation? It's quite critical for them to stay sharp in that respect.
Absolutely. We've actually seen some of the sort of leading drivers, the Formula E championships going on at the moment, the sort of virtual Formula E championship. These drivers are using these simulators as tools to sort of practice and keep themselves sharp, and it's exactly what I'm doing. It's not, as I say, it's not 100% realistic, and I don't think it'll ever be 100% realistic, but it's so close that you can practice braking points and gear choices and what tires you might be on for a given race pretty closely to what you're actually going to run when you turn up at the weekend.
Do you think it could give some teams an advantage if they continue to use it? Because obviously, as you said, it's so close.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at Formula One teams, they have moved from, so in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, they were using only wind tunnels to develop the car. And then suddenly computers got good enough that they could use computer aids to develop the cars like virtually. They could simulate what the wind would be doing over the car's body shape and improve it using the computer tools. And then of course, then we got the simulators were getting better and better, and they were starting to use those. So yeah, absolutely. And I think actually, if you're not at the cutting edge, certainly in Formula One, if you're not at the cutting edge of computer simulations, you'll be behind everyone else because it's free. It's you don't have to build a 10 million pound wind tunnel to simulate what's going to happen if you change a shape of the front wing. You don't have to do that. You can do it on the computer and say, oh well, we won't bother trying that on track because it didn't work on the computer. And I think if you're not at that cutting edge, I think you'll fall behind.
In your entire career, what would you say has been the pinnacle, your best moment, single moment, and why?
Okay, so for me, that's quite an easy one. I, as I say, I mentioned I raced supercars for quite a few years. I raced from 2010 or 2009 till 2016, and in 2013 we just got a new chassis. It was my first new chassis. Most people go through 2-3 chassis a season, but as I say, we weren't on such a high budget, and we just got a brand new kart. We just set it up, and it was at Snetterton. And every year there's this major race called the Superkart Grand Prix, and some pretty famous karters have won that in the past. And yeah, I won the first race of that weekend and the GP of that weekend. So I got a GP plate on my kart for the remainder of that season. That was my pinnacle moment actually. It was a great weekend, my best one.
Yeah, absolutely. And so obviously I know your mum quite well. Talk to me about sort of the influence of family in this sort of situation.
They've been incredible. The support, not, and I'm not just saying financial. The support they've given me over the years. They came last year. 2018. They came to Spa in Belgium to watch me race, and literally, um, they were over the moon to be coming to an F1 track to watch me race a car. You know, it's a wicked weekend, and they've always been there for me, and they've always sort of. My mum used to make us massive fish pies that we used to get through on the weekends at karting, because it was me and my dad. That was the mechanic when my brother raced as well. We were all sort of in our little horse lorry that we converted, freezing cold, eating a fish pie that my mum had made. So, yeah, it's been awesome, and you couldn't wish for better support, really. I think not having my family would mean I wouldn't have raced at all. So, they were the enablers, if you like. So, yeah, it's mega critical, and I thank them every day for it.
Yeah. So t obviously now you're not on the track. There's been you took a year out last year, so it's a bit difficult. So in terms of a work balance almost for you, because you've got work and
Yeah.
karting. How is that sort of how are you able to sort of balance everything?
Well, my missus would tell me I don't have enough time for everything. How do I balance everything? I have a job. I'm a graphic designer. I work Monday to Friday, designing vehicle liveries. Actually, that's my job, and that's what pays the bills at the end of the day. And then I use all of my spare time, pretty much, um, to the disdain of my missus. I use all of my spare time looking at sponsors, looking at what I can do off track to help people, sharing posts, doing my sim racing, all of this stuff. And I think if you don't work, I've been given the opportunity to race. So if you don't work at that, I don't think you've got to work hard at it to maintain it, to sustain it.
Yeah. So have you ever found that difficult to sort of maybe sometimes when you've got off racing, you're just like, oh nah, I've got to gonna go out, go to the pub, have a few
Yeah,
beers and all that stuff. So how tough is it when you sort of have a mental downwards in that respect?
you just have to always, yeah. I mean, there have been times where, for example, I've been taken out of a race and I've hit the wall and there's been loads of damage and none of it was my fault, or the engine blew up and there was nothing I could do about that, and what can you do? But the perspective has to be, I am lucky. There were hundreds of people, literally all the people that messaged me, that some of the people that came to watch me racing, all of these people who would love to be in my position, who would love to be on track at all. And you have to put that in perspective, and say, it doesn't matter. I'm lucky to be racing whatsoever. I'm just going to try my best to use the opportunity I've got to do the best I can. And if things are out of your control, it is what it is. If it's your own fault, then you can reflect inwardly. You can say, well, I messed up. I drove off the track. I hit that guy. But at least then at least you can go, just what can I learn from that? I won't do that next time. But so long as the overall perspective is what a thing I'm doing. I mean, it's an awesome thing that I'm doing. I could be playing football down the park, and that could be my sport. Yeah, sometimes it is, actually, to be honest. But with motorsport, you have an opportunity. If you haven't had that it's very difficult to do racing. It is expensive. You can do karting and stuff like that at a very low level, and that's what some people do. But to do the stuff that I would have been doing is, a wicked opportunity.
Yeah. So you said about sort of crashing. Sometimes people come into you. It's not your fault. Um, what's been the most frustrated that you've ever been on a track, and why?
Um, that's a difficult question. I think I had a weekend in VW Cup where the previous race was Spa, and so that was an awesome weekend. I finished, I think, sixth after starting pretty much at the back, because I had a bit of a problem with my engine or something. I can't remember exactly. So I started at the back and finished sixth, and then in the next race, I think I started like third, and I managed to make my way up to second, and then to first, and then I finished second in that race. I can't remember exactly. I think maybe the leader and me had a bit of a tangle or something, but I finished second in that race. The next weekend was Croft in North Yorkshire, freezing cold, and I hadn't got much budget left for the season. And we did a test day, and the pace was really good, and then the engine blew up. And the team were awesome. I think they drove 60 miles to find a new engine, picked a new engine up, brought it to the track. They spent all weekend, like literally all into the evening. It was like 1-2 o'clock before the boys went to bed, putting the new engine in the car. And literally I was like, I bought them beers and all sorts of stuff. And then we went to the first race, and it had no power, just nothing. And I finished like last in both races, and it was just so disappointing because they put all this hard work and effort in. We knew the pace had been in the car, and then unfortunately we were nowhere, and it was so miserable because there was nothing we could do. We'd done everything we possibly could, and it was just all out of our hands. And the team had worked really hard, and the pace had been there, and it just wasn't then, and it was just so disappointing.
So, what in terms of future plans for you have you got? So, obviously pandemic excluding, we won't talk about this too much. But what have you got in the pipeline?
Well, I mean, I'm keeping myself sharp as much as I can with my sim racing. I've actually got a Clio that I've modified. I took it to the Nürburgring last year. So the plan was to take it to the Nürburgring again this year with a few more modifications, but that doesn't look likely. I think it's going to be next year again. But that was cool, going down with the boys and racing around the Nürburgring. That was good. So I've got bits and pieces going on. The key is, I think, to see where the economic dust settles. Once we're out of this pandemic, we just need to see what businesses are doing, how they're doing, and what motorsport I could afford, really. I want to do something, but there's no point. I mean, if every business is really struggling, no one's going to want to spend any budget on motor racing, particularly not if it's not one of their family members or whatever. So that's going to be really tricky. And it's as well, you don't want to potentially irritate certain companies if you might have a future relationship with them. So that I'd have to pick the people I pitch to very carefully, because I don't want them to turn around and say, what are you doing? Why are you talking to me now? I've got no money because of this pandemic. So so it's going to be difficult. But we'll have to I think 2020 is a write-off, to be honest, and we'll just have to see what happens over the Christmas period with regards to the economy.
Yeah, and finally, so what advice would you give to a 12-year-old Toby Davis just getting into the karting, getting into it, right into it? What would you say?
Well, what I would say is, I mean, I was very lucky, as I say, my parents were able to help afford my initial racing. So to myself, I would say you're gonna get there. Just work a bit harder, because in the early few years, I could have worked harder, and we could have got to where I got to now a little bit sooner. And then maybe I could have got to British touring cars, which would have been the ultimate goal for me. In terms of any 12-year-old who might be watching or whatever, if you want to try motorsport, there is motorsport out there for you. Don't be put off. I've talked a lot about sponsorship and stuff. If you're any good whatsoever, or you feel like you might be quite good, just give it a go. There are karting tracks all around the country who've got very cheap initial events that you can go to, 100 quid here or there, and just get your parents, just beg them to take you. Have a go. I mean, there's nothing better than winning a race, and honestly, I believe that. And there's a clip of me on my Facebook page that's is literally me just exploding in emotion for about 30 seconds after winning a race, and that is the best feeling. And motorsport is the only sport I've played or done that can do that.
Absolutely. Well, that's a good way to finish, I think. So, Toby, where can we find you on social media, mate?
So I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and my Facebook. All the handles are at Toby Davis 34. Davis without the E, because I'm not Welsh. And yeah, just find me on there, and yeah,
Brilliant.
follow me if you like.
Brilliant stuff. And for you lot at home, make sure you're subscribed because there's 79% of you who aren't. So do it right now. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure having Toby on, and we will see you next time.